The first time I walked through the gates of Bellmore Academy, I understood exactly what kind of place it was. Not because anyone said it. Because places like that never have to. They let the walls say it. They let the cars say it. They let the silence say it for them. Bellmore was the kind of school where black SUVs lined the curb before 8 in the morning. Where mothers stepped out in cream coats and oversized sunglasses, like the air itself had been arranged for them. Where fathers in pressed suits stood near the stone entrance, checking stock prices before the first bell. Where even the children looked expensive. Perfect uniforms, perfect shoes, perfect posture, tiny airs and training. And then there was me. I stood there, in a navy blouse I had ironed 3 times that morning. Black slacks from Macy's. And flat I had polished so carefully they almost looked new. Almost. Beside me was my daughter, Ava, 12 years old. Brilliant. Quiet when she was thinking. Funny when she forgot to be careful. And on that morning, she was gripping my hand hard enough to tell me everything she wasn't saying. "Mom," she whispered. "Do I look okay?" I turned toward her and adjusted the edge of her blazer. Even though it didn't need adjusting, I smiled. The kind of smile mothers use when we are lying for love. "You look exactly like you belong here," I said. That was the first lie I told that day. Because the truth was, I already knew Bellmore was going to test us. Long before it ever tried to teach her anything. Ava hadn't gotten into Bellmore because of pity. She hadn't gotten in because someone felt generous. She had earned a full academic scholarship. Not partial. Not discounted. Not special consideration. A full merit scholarship through the Hawthorne Futures Initiative. 1 student each year. Out of hundreds. Her scores had been flawless. Her essay had stunned the review panel. Her interview had been so strong. The scholarship office called me personally. I still remembered that call. "Mrs. Carter," the woman had said. "We're honored to welcome your daughter. She's exceptional." I had thanked her, hung up, then cried alone in the laundry room so Ava wouldn't hear me. Because that word, exceptional, meant more than achievement. It meant escape. Not from hard work. I believe in hard work. I live by it. But maybe from ceilings. From rooms already decided before you enter them. From the kind of life that tells girls like my daughter to be brilliant. But not too visible. I was a private chef. I worked in Westchester, Manhattan, Scarsdale, homes with kitchens bigger than my apartment. Homes where women in Louis Vuitton carried sparkling water into pantries I wasn't allowed to be seen eating in. Homes where men discussed investments over sea bass. Like money was weather. I knew how to plate caviar. I knew how to finish truffle risotto without rushing. I knew how to move through a dining room without interrupting powerful people while they talked about foundations. Schools, boards, and summer houses. What I did not know was how to stand in front of a school like Bellmore and not feel myself being measured. The head of admissions greeted us near the entrance. "Mrs. Delaney." Elegant, controlled, perfect blowout. A smile that looked expensive and untrustworthy. "Welcome," she said. Her eyes moved to Ava, then to me, then back to Ava. "We're pleased you made it. Pleased you made it. Not pleased to have you." Ava smiled anyway. She was trying so hard to be brave that it made my chest hurt. "Thank you," she said. "Mrs. Delaney leaned down slightly. Not enough to be warm, just enough to be performative. "You'll find Bellmore has standards," she said. "We expect all of our scholarship students to adapt quickly." Scholarship students, plural. Even though Ava was the only one in her grade, I kept my face pleasant. I'm sure Ava will do more than adapt. For a fraction of a second, Mrs. Delaney's expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. That tiny flicker people get when someone they've already placed beneath them refuses to stay there. Orientation was held in the main assembly hall. Parents took their seats. Students were guided toward the front. Everywhere I looked, I saw family names spoken like currency. People greeted one another with that old money ease. That says, "We have seen each other on boards. At galas. At private dinners. At ski weekends. At funerals with catered lunch." This wasn't just a school. It was a network wearing a uniform. A man in a navy blazer sat beside me and nodded politely. What grade is your daughter entering? 7th. He smiled. Wonderful. Bellmore families tend to stay for generations. I looked at him. The word families hung there, harmless, sharp. Before I could answer, his wife leaned in and asked, "And which family are you with?" "Which family?" Not what is your name. Not who is your daughter. Which family? As if Bellmore was less a school than a private inheritance system. "I'm Ava's mother," I said. That answer ended the conversation. Not dramatically, just efficiently. The kind of social dismissal people use when they are too polished to be rude directly. After the welcome remarks, the students were taken on a campus walk. Parents drifted toward coffee tables and polite clustering. I stood alone for a minute, watching Ava disappear into the crowd of blazers and ribbons. Then I heard a woman behind me say, very softly, "Which one is the scholarship girl?" Another voice answered, "The tall one. The mother's in catering or something." I didn't turn around. Not because I didn't hear, because I did. And because women like that are rarely embarrassed by being caught. They're only annoyed. So I kept my spine straight and memorized the voices. That became a habit very quickly. The first 2 weeks passed the way bad environments usually begin, not with open cruelty, with edited warmth, with selective inclusion, with the kind of treatment designed to remain deniable. A teacher praised Ava's writing in class, then introduced her to another parent at pickup as one of our scholarship success stories. A mother at a school coffee event asked me where I had bought Ava's uniform, then said, "Oh, good. Some discount places do manage to get the Navy right." One boy asked Ava whether scholarship students had to report their grades every month, like a contract. A girl laughed and said, "Maybe she gets free lunch, too." Children do not invent these things alone. They carry them home from somewhere. Then one Thursday, Bellmore stopped pretending. Ava came home later than usual. Not late enough to worry me, just quiet enough to. She usually dropped her bag, started talking before she finished taking off her shoes, and gave me a running summary of the day. Who said something ridiculous? Who answered a question wrong with confidence? What book discussion had annoyed her? That afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table and peeled the label off a water bottle in complete silence. "What happened?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Ava." She exhaled slowly. "There was a lunch issue." My body went still. "What kind of issue?" She looked down. "My meal account didn't show up in the system." I waited. "Because there was more. There were people behind me," she said. "The cashier called someone over. Then they asked me to step aside." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Did they fix it?" "Eventually." Eventually. That word can hold a whole humiliation inside it. "How long?" "A few minutes." "In front of everyone?" Ava nodded. I felt anger rise so fast. It was almost clean. Not because of the system error. Errors happen. Because of the adults. Because a child stood there publicly embarrassed. And not one adult in that room understood what it meant. Or worse, they understood exactly. "What did they say?" She gave a tired little shrug. That maybe scholarship coverage hadn't gone through yet. I stared at her. Scholarship coverage. In a cafeteria line. Spoken out loud. To a room full of children. That night I checked every document we had. The scholarship contract. The enrollment paperwork. The meal registration. Everything was active. Everything had been active. Bellmore had the records. Which meant what happened to Ava was not just a mistake. It was negligence with an audience. The next morning I went to school. Not loud. Not shaking. Calm scares institutions more than tears ever do. The receptionist at Student Affairs recognized me immediately. That told me enough already. "Mrs. Carter," she said, smiling the way hospitals smell clean but never comforting. "How can we help you?" I placed the folder on the desk. "I'm here regarding the cafeteria incident involving my daughter." A few minutes later, Assistant Dean Rebecca Sloan led me into a glass-walled office, the kind designed to make organizations look transparent, while hiding everything that matters. She folded her hands. "I'm very sorry." Ava felt embarrassed. I looked at her. Felt embarrassed? She tried again. "The situation was unfortunate." "No," I said. The situation was public humiliation caused by administrative negligence. That got through, not emotionally. Structurally, she began talking about system confusion, staff delays, meal verification. I let her finish. Then I asked the only question that mattered. I'm not asking about the computer. I said, I'm asking about the adults. Why did nobody step in? She had no real answer. And that told me what I needed to know. There had been witnesses. They simply didn't think Ava mattered enough to intervene. By the time I left, I had an apology email, a promise of staff review, and a meeting scheduled with head of school Daniel Mercer. None of it felt like justice. It felt like the first crack. But Bellmore wasn't going to reveal itself in formal meetings. Places like that never do. Their real culture lives in the spaces between official language, in the parent whispers, in the curated invitations, in the names included and the names left out. Bellmore showed me the next piece of itself 2 days later. Ava came home quieter than usual again. That was becoming a language. There's a parent committee brunch on Saturday, she said. And she peeled at the bottle label again. Every 7th grade girl was invited to help at the welcome table for the Founders season kickoff. I already knew where this was going. And she looked down. Except me. The room changed shape. Did they say why? Mrs. Whitmore told Lily Patterson that some girls are a better reflection of school culture. School culture. That was the polished version of not your kind. Ava tried to smile. It collapsed halfway. It's okay, she said. I didn't want to go. That was another lie mothers recognize immediately. Who told you? I asked. She hesitated. Then she said, Grayson heard his mom talking after carpool. He said they don't want scholarship kids greeting donors. I turned toward the sink and ran the faucet. Not because I needed water, but because I needed the sound of something steady while I kept my voice under control. Behind me, Ava said softly. Mom, please don't make it worse. That stopped me. I turned off the water and faced her. You think standing up for you makes it worse? Her eyes widened. No. I don't want everyone staring at me more. And there it was. The real damage. Not the insult. The shrinking after it. The way children start negotiating with mistreatment because they're afraid dignity will cost them too much visibility. I crossed the kitchen and knelt beside her chair. Look at me. She did. You are not the problem in a room that treats excellence like a threat. Her eyes filled. But she blinked fast. I know, she said. But she sounded tired. That night, after she went to sleep, I logged into the Bellmore parent portal. The brunch page had photos from previous years. Smiling girls in perfect uniforms. Flowers arranged beside donation cards. Mothers posing near branded display tables. Luxury raffle baskets. One year's silent auction included courtside Knicks tickets. Gucci tote. And a private shopping experience at Louis Vuitton. Not subtle. I clicked through the committee page. There it was. Chair. Vanessa Whitmore. Of course. Then another name caught my eye. Events director. Claire Donnelly. I knew Claire. Not well. But enough. Years earlier, she had hired me to cater a charity dinner in Rye when another chef canceled. She remembered good work. People like Claire always do. Even when they forget the people who did it. I stared at her name for a long moment. Then I checked the scholarship materials again. That was when I saw it. A formal note attached to the original award packet. The Hawthorne Futures Initiative requested that the student recipient and guardian attend a private event later that semester. The Founders Community Dinner. Hosted by Margaret Hawthorne. I read the line twice. Then I read the signature. Margaret Hawthorne. Everyone in New York knew that name. Not just because she was rich. Because she was consequential. Museum boards. School endowments. Quiet institutional power. The kind of woman who never needed to raise her voice. Because her name had already entered the room before she did. Years ago, I had catered one event at a Hawthorne property. Only once. But I remembered one thing very clearly. Margaret Hawthorne noticed everything. I sat there in my small kitchen, under cheap overhead light, with Bellmore's parent portal open in front of me, and Ava asleep down the hall. Bellmore thought my daughter should feel lucky. Lucky to be admitted. Lucky to be tolerated. lucky to be used in the brochure version of Belonging, while being edited out of the real one. But Bellmore had made one mistake. They had assumed power only lived inside their walls. They had assumed women like Vanessa Whitmore decided who mattered. They had assumed people like me would stay grateful. Stay careful. Stay quiet. I looked at Margaret Hawthorne's name one more time. Then I looked toward Ava's room. And for the first time since Bellmore had begun revealing itself, I felt something colder than anger. Something better. Direction. Because if this school wanted to treat my daughter like a decorative exception, then I was going to make very sure the right woman saw exactly how Bellmore behaved when they thought no one important was watching. At the time, I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't know how many people were already involved. I didn't know that one of Bellmore's most admired families was about to become very relevant to me. I didn't know how expensive this school's version of inclusion was about to become. But I knew one thing. They had mistaken quiet for powerless. And that is a mistake people like them always regret. Too late. The next time I stepped onto Bellmore's campus, I didn't feel smaller. I felt focused. There's a difference. One makes you hesitate. The other makes you watch. I didn't confront anyone that morning. Not Mrs. Delaney. Not the assistant dean. Not the mothers who had already decided who we were. Because I wasn't there to argue. I was there to understand. Power doesn't show itself in speeches. It shows itself in patterns. In who gets invited, who gets introduced, who gets protected, and who gets quietly removed. So I started paying attention. Not emotionally, precisely. Pickup line. Who stood together? Who didn't? Which parents greeted each other by first name? Which ones were ignored? Emails. Which families got early access? Which ones were looped in later? Committees. Who led them? Who was always visible? Who was always almost included? And every path led back to the same name. Whitmore. Vanessa Whitmore. Graceful. Polished. Untouchable. The kind of woman who never raised her voice. Because she never had to. Rooms adjusted around her. People deferred before she even spoke. And, more importantly, Bellmore listened. I saw her 3 days later. At the parent coffee event. She stood near the center of the room. Not because she needed attention, but because attention naturally arranged itself around her. Her coat alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. Chanel. Classic. Effortless. Intentional. She laughed at something someone said. Light. Controlled. Then her eyes moved. Scanning. Sorting. And for a brief second, they landed on me. She didn't frown. Didn't smile. Didn't react at all. Which, in rooms like that, is the reaction. I walked toward the coffee table, poured myself a cup, waited, and listened. You know the brunch needs to feel elevated this year, one mother said. Vanessa nodded slightly. Of course. The donors expect consistency. Another woman leaned in. And the girls at the welcome table? Vanessa didn't hesitate. We select carefully. First impressions matter. First impressions. Not students. Not children. Impressions. And the scholarship girl? Someone asked. Quieter. Vanessa picked up her cup, took a small sip, then said, We're not making that the face of Bellmore. Just like that. No anger. No hesitation. Just a decision. I didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Because now I knew. This wasn't subtle exclusion. This was policy. That afternoon, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car. Engine off. Hands still. And I made a decision. If Bellmore was going to pretend this was about fit, then I was going to stop reacting like a parent and start thinking like a professional, because I understood something they didn't. I had been inside their world before, not as one of them, but close enough to see how it actually worked. I had cooked in their kitchens, stood just outside their conversations, heard what they said when they believed no one important was listening. And people like Vanessa Whitmore? They don't build power alone. They reinforce it, protect it, repeat it, which means, if you want to challenge them, you don't confront the person. You expose the system. That night, I pulled out a notebook. Not my laptop. Paper. Because writing by hand forces clarity. I started with one page. At the top, I wrote, Bellmore. Then underneath, pattern, Cafeteria incident. Public. Unnecessary. Preventable. Brunch exclusion. Intentional. Selective. Social positioning. Language used. Scholarship girl. Better reflection. First impressions? Then I drew a line down the middle of the page. Left side. What they say. Right side. What they do. Inclusive. Exclusive. Merit-based. Image-based. Opportunity. Control. By the time I finished, it wasn't a list anymore. It was a structure. And structures are much harder to deny. The next step was simple. I needed access. Not official access. Real access. Bellmore guarded its image carefully. But the people inside it? Less so. Especially in private spaces. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Claire Donnelly. I kept the message short, professional, neutral. Hi, Claire. It's Elena Carter. If you ever need catering support for upcoming events, I have some availability this season. I didn't mention Bellmore. I didn't mention Ava. I didn't mention anything personal. Claire responded in under an hour. Funny timing. I'm helping coordinate a small dinner next week. Private client. High standards. Interested? I smiled. Of course she was. What kind of dinner? I asked. She replied with a name. Whitmore. For a moment, everything went very still. Then I typed back, I'd be happy to help. The night of the dinner. I arrived early. Uniform pressed. Hair tied back. No jewelry. No distraction. The Whitmore house in Rye was exactly what you'd expect. Large. Controlled. Quiet in the way expensive places are quiet. Inside. Everything was arranged perfectly. Flowers placed with intention. Lighting soft but deliberate. A dining table set for 10. Crystal. Silver. Precision. I moved through the kitchen like I always did. Focused. Efficient. Invisible when necessary. Observant always. Guests began arriving around 7. Voices filled the house. Laughter. Polite greetings. The sound of people used to being listened to. Vanessa Whitmore entered last. Not late. Just timed. She greeted everyone with ease. Touched arms lightly. Held eye contact just long enough. Commanded the room without ever asking for it. Dinner was served in courses. Each one paced. Each one intentional. And between courses, they talked. About Bellmore. Of course, admissions this year were complicated. One man said. Vanessa nodded. We had to be careful. Careful how? Another asked. Vanessa smiled. The kind of smile that hides decisions inside it. Balance, she said. Excellence. And presentation. Presentation. There it was again. And the scholarship student? Someone asked. Vanessa set her glass down gently. She'll do well, she said, academically. A pause. Small. Precise. But Bellmore is more than academics. A few people nodded. No one questioned it. Because they all understood what she meant. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a tray I didn't need to hold, and listened. And in that moment, everything became clear. Ava wasn't being excluded by accident. She was being positioned, allowed to exist, not allowed to represent, welcomed, but never centered. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. Anger is loud. This was quiet. This was confirmation. After dessert, as guests moved into the sitting room, I stepped outside for air. Not because I needed it, because I needed distance from what I had just heard. So I could think clearly. Inside that house, Bellmore had revealed itself completely. Not in policy, not in emails, not in meetings. In conversation. And conversations like that? They're never meant to be recorded. Which is exactly why they matter. I looked back at the house. Lights glowing. Voices drifting. Power. Comfortable. And unaware. Then I looked down at my phone. And opened my notes. Because now, I didn't just have a pattern. I had proof of how that pattern was protected. And that changes everything. Because once you understand how a system protects itself, you know exactly where to apply pressure. And I was done asking Bellmore to do the right thing. From that point on, I was going to make it impossible for them to keep doing the wrong one. They thought I didn't belong in their world. What they didn't understand was, I already knew how it worked, and now, I was inside it. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset, because everything had finally aligned. Before that dinner, I had suspicions. After it, I had structure. And once you have structure, you don't chase moments anymore. You build a case. The next morning, I didn't go to Bellmore. I didn't send emails. I didn't make calls. I stayed home, closed the door, and turned my kitchen table into a workspace. Not emotional, not reactive, systematic. I opened a new notebook, clean page, black pen, no distractions. At the top, I wrote, Bellmore, internal pattern log. Then I started from the beginning. Not the biggest incident, the first one, because patterns don't begin loudly. They begin small, quiet, easy to dismiss. Cafeteria? Exact words. They embarrassed her. Instead, staff requested student to step aside. Used phrase. Scholarship coverage may not be active. Spoken in public line. No adjectives. No assumptions. Just facts. Next entry. Parent coffee. Conversation reference. We're not making that the face of Bellmore. Speaker, Vanessa Whitmore. Context. Donor-facing event selection. Then brunch exclusion. Student removed from welcome table rotation. Justification used. Better reflection of school culture. Indirect communication through student network. I didn't rush. I didn't skip. Every detail mattered. Because details do something powerful. They remove interpretation. And once you remove interpretation, people can't argue with you. By noon, I had 3 full pages. By 2 o'clock, I had 6. By evening, I wasn't writing incidents anymore. I was mapping behavior. I drew lines between entries. Connected language. Repeated phrases. Same people. Same outcomes. It wasn't random. It was consistent, intentional, curated. And the more I wrote, the more something became obvious. Bellmore didn't have a discrimination problem. It had a presentation strategy. They weren't excluding students like Ava completely. That would be visible. They were positioning them. Visible enough to prove diversity. Invisible enough to protect image. That's harder to prove. Unless you document it. And now, I was. That night, after Ava went to bed, I transferred everything to my laptop. Digital copies. Timestamped. Backed up. Because if there's one thing I've learned working in wealthy homes, it's this. People with power don't fear accusations. They fear records. The next step was risk. Because documenting a system is one thing, challenging it is another. I needed someone inside Bellmore who couldn't ignore what I had. Not a teacher. Too limited. Not admissions. Too invested. I needed someone who was responsible for outcomes. Head of school, Daniel Mercer. The man who smiled during orientation. The man who said, "We're pleased you made it." I requested a meeting. No emotion in the email. No accusation. Just one line that mattered. I would like to discuss a series of documented inconsistencies affecting scholarship student experience. He replied within 2 hours. That told me everything. We met the next morning. His office was exactly what I expected. Large. Minimal. Carefully neutral. The kind of room designed to make difficult conversations feel smaller. He gestured for me to sit. Smiled. Controlled. How can I help? Mrs. Carter? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed a folder on his desk. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just enough. He glanced at it. Then at me. What is this? Documentation. I said. He opened it. Slowly. First page. Cafeteria. Second page. Parent event. Third page. Language patterns. His expression didn't change much. But I saw it. That moment when confidence meets something unexpected. He closed the folder gently. I'm sure these situations can be explained. He said. Of course. That's always the first response. I nodded. I agree. I said. A pause, individually. Another pause. But not collectively. Now he was listening. I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Precise. This isn't about one incident. I said. It's about repetition. I slid a second sheet toward him. A simple chart. Left column. Language used. Right column. Outcome. He looked at it longer this time. No denial. No explanation. Just processing. Bellmore prides itself on inclusion, he said carefully. I held his gaze. Then this should concern you. Silence. Real silence. Not polite. Not structured. Uncomfortable. Because now, this wasn't a conversation. It was a liability. He cleared his throat slightly. I'll need time to review this. Of course he would. Time is what institutions ask for when they need space to decide whether to fix something or contain it. I stood. Take all the time you need, I said. Then I added, very calmly, I've already organized everything chronologically. That landed. Because now, he understood. This wasn't going away. As I reached the door, he said, Mrs. Carter. I turned. We take these matters seriously. I nodded. I'm counting on that. And then I left, walking out of that office. I didn't feel relief. I felt something sharper. Momentum. Because now, Bellmore knew I was watching. And more importantly, they knew I was documenting. But what they didn't know yet was how far I was willing to take it. And they definitely didn't know who else was about to see everything I had collected. That part was coming next. After my meeting with Daniel Mercer, Bellmore went quiet. Not normal quiet. Controlled quiet. Emails became slower. Responses more careful. Smiles more deliberate. That's how institutions react when they're not sure yet whether you're a problem or a risk. I didn't follow up. Didn't remind. Didn't push. Because pressure, when applied too early, gives people time to prepare. And I wasn't interested in preparation. I was interested in exposure. 3 days passed. Then 4. And then something shifted. Ava came home that afternoon with something I hadn't seen in days. Energy. They added me back to the volunteer list, she said. I looked at her. Back? Back? She hesitated. They said it was a scheduling error. Of course they did. Errors are convenient. They don't have intent. They don't have responsibility. But corrections? Corrections mean someone noticed. Who told you? I asked. Mrs. Donnelly, Ava said. She was really nice. Claire. That was faster than I expected. Which meant one thing. My meeting with Mercer had already moved beyond his office. But not enough. Because small corrections are how systems protect themselves from larger consequences. They fix the visible problem and hope you stop looking. I wasn't going to stop. That night, I reviewed everything again. Not to check facts, to check leverage. Because documentation creates pressure, but only if it reaches the right person. And Mercer? He wasn't the final authority. He was the gatekeeper. And gatekeepers protect doors. They don't open them. So I went back to the scholarship documents. Hawthorne Futures Initiative. One line stood out now, more than it had before. Selected families will be invited to a private founders community dinner. Not optional. Not vague. Invited. I checked the date. 2 weeks away. Enough time. I opened my laptop and started a new file. Title: Founder Brief Bellmore Scholarship Experience. This wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a report. It was a narrative. Because powerful people don't respond to noise. They respond to clarity. I structured it carefully. Opening. Not as a victim. As a student. Her achievements. Her work. Her voice. Then. Bellmore. Not accusations. Patterns. Language used. Situations repeated. Positioning strategy. Then. Impact. Not emotional exaggeration. Measured effect. Visibility without inclusion. Recognition without belonging. And finally, a single question. Is this aligned with the intent of the Hawthorne Futures Initiative? That question mattered. Because it didn't attack Bellmore. It challenged alignment. And alignment is what institutions fear losing. I finished at 217 a.m. Read it once. Didn't edit much. Because the truth when structured correctly, doesn't need decoration. The next morning, I didn't send it. Not yet. Timing matters more than content. And timing was about to present itself. 2 days later, an email arrived. Subject line: Bellmore Founders Community Dinner Confirmation. I opened it slowly. Formal tone, carefully worded. We are pleased to confirm your attendance. Of course they were, because now they knew who I was connected to. And suddenly, I wasn't just a parent anymore. I was proximity. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening. Location: Hawthorne House, Upper Westchester. I knew the house. Everyone did, but very few people had actually been inside it. Saturday came faster than expected. I dressed simply: black dress, minimal jewelry, no statement. Because I wasn't going there to impress anyone. I was going there to be impossible to dismiss. Ava stood in the doorway, watching me get ready. Are you nervous? She asked. I smiled slightly. No. That wasn't entirely true. But it wasn't fear. It was precision. Do I have to say anything? She asked quietly. I walked over to her. No, I said. Just be exactly who you are. She nodded. And for the first time in days, she looked steady. We arrived just before sunset. Hawthorne House didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't need to. Long driveway, stone exterior, windows catching the last light of the evening, power. Without performance. Inside, everything was calm, not staged, not forced, intentional. Staff moved quietly. Guests spoke in low tones. No one was trying to be seen, which is how you know they already are. A woman approached us near the entrance. Not rushed, not distracted, present. Mrs. Carter, she said. Her voice was calm, measured. I'm Margaret Hawthorne. For a moment, the entire room disappeared. Not dramatically, just quietly. Because this was the center of everything. I extended my hand. Thank you for having us. She shook it once. Direct. Then she looked at Ava. Not over her. Not past her. At her. You must be Ava. Ava nodded. Yes. Ma'am? Margaret's expression softened slightly. I read your essay, she said. Ava blinked. You did? Margaret nodded. Clarity is rare at your age. No exaggeration. No performance. Just recognition. And in that moment, something shifted. Because, for the first time since Bellmore began, Ava wasn't being evaluated. She was being seen. Dinner began shortly after. Guests took their seats. Conversations flowed easily. But underneath it, there was structure. Who spoke? Who listened? Who led? And Margaret? She didn't dominate the room. She anchored it. Midway through the first course, she turned slightly toward Ava. Tell me, she said. How has your experience at Bellmore been so far? The room didn't stop. But it changed. Subtly. Because everyone heard the question. And everyone understood. It wasn't casual. Ava looked at me. I didn't nod. Didn't guide. This was hers. She took a breath. Some parts are really good, she said. Honest. Margaret waited. And some parts, Ava continued, feel like I'm supposed to be grateful more than included. Silence. Not loud, but real, said. Margaret didn't react immediately. She let the words sit. Then she asked, very simply, can you explain that? Ava swallowed. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She didn't get emotional. She got precise. Sometimes people talk about me, she said. Like I'm something the school did right. A pause. But not someone who belongs there. No one interrupted. No one redirected. Because now, this wasn't a story. It was a statement. Margaret turned her gaze slowly. Across the table. Not accusing. Assessing. Then she looked at me. Mrs. Carter, she said. One sentence. That was all she needed. I reached into my bag and placed a single document on the table. Not the full case. Not everything. Just enough. A summary. Structured. Clear. I thought it might be helpful. I said. No emotion. No urgency. Just placement. Margaret glanced down at the page, then back up, and for the first time that night, her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because now, she wasn't hearing a concern. She was seeing a pattern. And once people like Margaret Hawthorne see a pattern, they don't ignore it. They follow it. Carefully. Completely. And when they reach the end, they don't ask questions. They make decisions. That dinner didn't end loudly. No confrontation. No scene. Just conversation. Measured. Quiet. But something had shifted. Because now, Bellmore wasn't just being observed. It was being evaluated. By someone they couldn't control. And that changes everything. As we drove home that night, Ava sat quietly beside me. Not withdrawn. Not small. Steady. They listened. She said. I glanced at her. Yes. I said. They did. What I didn't say was what came next. Because listening is only the beginning. What matters is what people do after they understand. And Margaret Hawthorne had just understood everything. The shift didn't happen overnight. It never does. Systems like Bellmore don't collapse. They adjust, quietly, strategically. The Monday after the dinner, everything looked better. Teachers smiled more. Staff responded faster. Ava's name suddenly appeared on things it hadn't before. Group lists, volunteer rotations, class mentions. On the surface, it looked like progress. But I knew better. Because real change doesn't feel like correction. It feels like disruption. And this felt like containment. Mom, Ava said that afternoon. They're being really nice now. I looked at her. Who is? Everyone? She said. Even Mrs. Sloane smiled at me today. Of course she did. Because now, they were aware. And awareness creates performance. What else changed? I asked. She hesitated. They asked if I wanted to help with the founder display. There it was. Not inclusion. Repositioning. Did you say yes? I asked. She nodded slowly. I thought I should. I didn't correct her. Because this part mattered. Let them adjust. Let them reveal. Because when systems try to fix perception, they expose intention. 2 days later, the first pushback came. Not direct. Never direct. It came through distance. An email. From Bellmore Administration. Subject line. Community Standards. Reminder. I opened it. Carefully worded. Language about respect. Appropriate communication channels. No names. No incidents. But the message was clear. Control the narrative. I read it once. Then again. Then I closed it. Because this wasn't about Ava anymore. This was about me. They weren't correcting behavior. They were signaling boundaries. And that meant one thing. Pressure had reached somewhere important. That same afternoon, I got a call. Unknown number. I answered. Mrs. Carter. A woman's voice said. Warm but measured. This is Rebecca Sloane from Bellmore. Of course it was. I wanted to follow up regarding recent concerns. She continued. Follow up? Translation. Containment. I'm listening. I said. A pause. We feel it would be best moving forward to address any issues directly through administrative channels. She said. There it was. We want to fix this. We want control of how it's handled. I have been addressing it directly. I said. Another pause. Yes. She replied. But involving external parties can complicate resolution. External parties. Margaret, they knew. And now, they were uncomfortable. I'm not interested in convenience, I said calmly. I'm interested in accuracy. Silence, because now. This wasn't a parent conversation. It was positioning. We are committed to Ava's success, she said carefully. I'm committed to her belonging. I replied. That ended the call. But the real escalation hadn't even started yet. It came the next morning. Ava walked into the kitchen, holding her phone. Her face, not upset, controlled. Which was worse? Mom, she said quietly. Someone posted something. I took the phone. School forum. Anonymous account. Thread title. Are scholarship students held to the same standards? My body went still. I scrolled. Comments. Subtle. Careful. Krell. Just asking questions. Some kids get advantages. Maybe expectations should be clearer. No names. But everyone knew. That's how systems attack. When they want deniability. They don't accuse. They suggest. They let the crowd do the rest. I handed the phone back slowly. Did anyone say anything to you? I asked. Ava shook her head. Not directly. Of course not. Direct confrontation creates accountability. This creates pressure. Do you want to stay home today? I asked. She shook her head again. No. Her voice was steady. I'm not doing anything wrong. I held her gaze. No. I said. You're not. And in that moment, I knew something had changed. Not just in Bellmore. In Ava. Because she wasn't shrinking anymore. She was holding. And that matters. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The case file. Updated. New section. Indirect pressure tactics. Forum post. Timestamp. Language pattern. Not emotional. Precise. Because this mattered more than anything before. Up until now. Bellmore had been managing image. It was defending itself. And defense creates mistakes. I didn't contact the school. I didn't respond to the forum. Because reacting was exactly what they wanted. Instead, I expanded the file. Screenshots. Archived links. User activity patterns. Then I added something new. Correlation. Timeline. My meeting with Mercer. Founder dinner. Administrative email. Forum post. Sequence. Not random. Not coincidence. Connected. And once something is connected, it becomes evidence. That afternoon, another email arrived. This one, short. From Margaret Hawthorne's office. Subject. Follow-up. I opened it immediately. Mrs. Carter. Thank you for your time this past weekend. We would like to review the materials you referenced in more detail. My hand rested on the trackpad. Still. Because this was the moment. Everything, until now, had been preparation, documentation, positioning. But this was escalation. I replied with one line. Of course. I'll send everything this evening. No rush. No explanation. Just confirmation. Because when power asks, you don't overwhelm it. You deliver. That night, I finalized the file. Not longer. Sharper. Sections. Clear headings. Pattern. Language. Impact. Escalation. And now, response behavior. I attached everything. Read it once. Then sent it. No second guessing. No hesitation. Because at this point, this wasn't about being believed. It was about being undeniable. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks. Because Bellmore thought they were managing a situation. They thought they were containing risk. They thought they could adjust behavior. Just enough to make everything go away. What they didn't understand was they weren't dealing with a complaint. They were part of a case. And now, that case was in the hands of someone they couldn't influence. Someone who didn't need them. Someone who didn't benefit from protecting them. And people like that, they don't soften truth. They act on it. As I turned off the lights that night, one thought stayed with me. Bellmore had finally realized. I wasn't going to stop. What they hadn't realized yet was that it was already too late. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The response didn't come immediately. It came, precisely, 2 days after I sent the file. An email arrived. Not from Bellmore. From Hawthorne Legal Affairs. Subject. Request for review session. I opened it once. Then again. Formal. Structured. Clear. We would like to schedule a review regarding the Hawthorne Futures Initiative placement at Bellmore Academy. Not concern. Review. That word matters. Because concern can be dismissed. Review cannot. Time was set. Thursday, 10 a.m. Location. Bellmore. On campus? That was intentional. Because reviews like this don't happen behind closed doors. They happen where accountability lives. I didn't reply immediately. Not out of hesitation. Out of control. Then I typed, I'll be there. Short, clean, final. The next 48 hours felt different, not tense, tight, like something had already started moving, and no one could stop it. At Bellmore, the changes became visible, too visible. Teachers avoided saying anything unnecessary. Staff interactions became careful. Parents? Quieter. Because news travels fast. In places built on reputation. And this wasn't normal school gossip. This was risk. Mom, Ava said the night before. Something feels weird. I looked at her. It is persistation, I said. She sat across from me. Did I do something wrong? There it was again. That reflex. I shook my head. No. Then I leaned forward slightly. You told the truth. A pause. And sometimes, I added, truth makes people uncomfortable. She nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but steady, and that was enough. Thursday morning came cold. Clear sky, sharp air, the kind of morning that makes everything feel more defined. I arrived early, not to prepare, to observe. Bellmore looked the same. Stone walls, clean walkways, perfect landscaping, but underneath it, something had shifted. Staff stood differently, less relaxed, more aware. Because today, this wasn't their space anymore. At exactly 9:58 a.m., a black car pulled into the circular drive. Not flashy, just deliberate. Two people stepped out first. Legal. You can always tell. Neutral expressions. Minimal movement. Observing everything. Then, Margaret Hawthorne. She didn't rush. Didn't look around. She walked in. Like the building had been waiting for her. And in a way, it had. Daniel Mercer was already at the entrance. Smile in place. Measured. Prepared. But there's a difference between being prepared and being in control. And today, he wasn't. Margaret, he said, extending his hand. She shook it once, then said, Daniel. No warmth, no hostility, just recognition, which, somehow, felt heavier than either. We were led into the conference room. Glass walls, long table, carefully arranged seating. Positions matter in rooms like this. Mercer at the head. Margaret, not at the opposite end. Slightly to the side. Because she didn't need the head of the table to hold the room. The legal team sat quietly. Laptops open. Documents ready. I took my seat. No introductions needed. Everyone knew why we were there. Margaret spoke first. Measured. We're here to review the alignment between Bellmore Academy and the Hawthorne Futures Initiative. Not emotional. Not accusatory. Precisi. Mercer nodded. Of course. We take this partnership very seriously. Of course he did. Until now. Margaret glanced briefly at the legal team. Then back at Mercer. We've reviewed preliminary materials, she said. Preliminary. That word landed. Because it meant this wasn't the full picture yet. Mercer smiled slightly. I'm confident we can clarify any misunderstandings. There it was. Misunderstandings. The last refuge of systems under pressure. Margaret didn't respond to that. Instead, she opened a folder. My file. But not exactly as I had sent it. Refined. Structured differently. Stronger. Because now, it had been reviewed by people who specialize in making things undeniable. She turned the first page. Let's begin here, she said. Cafeteria incident. Language. Mercer nodded. Yes. That was a systems error. We've already. Margaret lifted a hand slightly. Not interrupting. Stopping. I'm not interested in the error, she said. A pause. I'm interested in the response. Silence. Because that was the difference. Errors happen. Responses reveal culture. She turned the page. Parent event exclusion. Language used. Decision path. Mercer shifted slightly. These types of selections are often subjective. Again, her hand. Still calm. Still controlled. Subjective does not mean unaccountable, she said. No raise in voice. No emphasis. But the room tightened. Because now, this wasn't discussion. It was evaluation. Page after page. Pattern after pattern. Language repeated. Outcomes repeated. Until eventually, there was nothing left to explain, only something to acknowledge. Margaret closed the folder, then looked directly at Mercer, and asked one question. Do you believe this reflects the values Bellmore claims to uphold? No room for interpretation. No escape into process. Just truth. Mercer didn't answer immediately. Because he couldn't. Not honestly. Not safely. And in that hesitation, everything became clear. Margaret nodded once. Not in agreement. In conclusion, then we have a misalignment, she said. Simple. Final. But in rooms like this, words like that don't stay small. They expand. Into consequences. Into decisions. Into change. The legal team spoke next. Not loudly, but with precision. Based on current findings, we'll be initiating a full review of Bellmore's participation in the Hawthorne Futures Initiative. Full review. That was it. That was the point. You don't come back from easily. Because now, this wasn't internal anymore. It was institutional. And institutions protect themselves. By removing risk. Mercer nodded slowly. We'll cooperate fully. Of course he would. Because now, he had no other option. The meeting ended without drama. No raised voices. No confrontation. Just decisions. Which are always more dangerous. As we stood to leave, Margaret turned to me briefly. Thank you for your clarity, she said. Not kindness. Not comfort. Recognition. And that was enough. Outside, the air felt colder. Sharper. More real. Bellmore stood behind me. Still beautiful. Still polished. But no longer protected. Because now, the wrong person had asked the right questions. And once that happens, systems don't recover quietly. They unravel. The review didn't end that day. It expanded. Quietly. Quickly. Within a week. Bellmore wasn't managing a situation anymore. It was under examination. Formal. Structured. Unavoidable. Emails stopped being careful. They became minimal. Meetings increased. Closed doors. Lower voices. And one thing became very clear. This was no longer about Ava. This was about the school. 3 days after the review session, another notice came. This one. Internal. Board level. Subject. Special Review Assembly. Mandatory. Faculty. Administration. Selected parent representatives. Hawthorne Legal. I read it once, then forwarded it to myself. Because documents like that matter. They prove escalation. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Same campus. Different room. Larger. Not intimate. Deliberate. Because this wasn't a conversation. It was exposure. Friday arrived without warning. That's how moments like this always feel. Prepared for. But still sudden. I walked into Bellmore. And everything felt tighter. Not broken. Contained. Staff avoided eye contact. Parents spoke in shorter sentences. Even the hallways felt quieter. Because everyone knew. Something was about to be decided. The conference hall was already half full. Long table at the front. Rows of chairs behind it. Board members. Faculty. Selected parents. And at the center, Margaret Hawthorne. Still calm. Still measured. But this time, not observing. Leading. Daniel Mercer stood to the side. Not at the head. That mattered. Because position reveals power. And his had shifted. I took a seat near the middle. Not hidden. Not central. Visible. The room settled slowly. Then Margaret spoke. No introduction. No build-up. We're here to review findings regarding Bellmore Academy's alignment with the Hawthorne Futures Initiative. Direct. No softening. A screen behind her lit up. Slide 1. Simple. 2 columns. Bellmore Public Values. Observed outcomes. No commentary. Just contrast. Inclusion. Selective visibility. Merit-based access. Image-based positioning. Student support. Conditional participation. The room didn't react loudly. But it changed. Because now, this wasn't opinion. It was comparison. Slide 2. Language patterns. Exact phrase. Dates. Contexts. No interpretation. Just repetition. Slide 3. Timeline. Cafeteria. Exclusion. Internal response. Forum activity. administrative communication. Sequence. Connected. Structured. Undeniable. No one spoke. Because there was nothing to argue with, Margaret turned slightly. Does anyone here dispute the accuracy of this documentation? Silence. Not hesitation. Absence. Because dispute requires evidence. And no one had any. Mercer shifted, slightly, then cleared his throat. We acknowledge that certain situations may have been mishandled. Margaret didn't interrupt. She let him finish, which made it worse. Because now, he had to hear himself. But it's important to recognize that Bellmore has always been committed to. Committed to what? She asked. Not aggressive. Just precise. Mercer stopped. Because suddenly, the sentence he had said 100 times before, I didn't work anymore. The room waited. And that's when it happened. Margaret stepped slightly forward. Not physically. Structurally. She looked around the room. Board members. Parents. Faculty. Then she asked the question. The one that ended everything. If a student must be grateful to be included. She said. Are they actually included? No one moved. No one spoke. Because that question didn't allow explanation. It didn't allow process. It didn't allow policy. It allowed only truth. And the truth was sitting in the room with them. Visible. Documented. Unavoidable. Margaret didn't repeat the question. She didn't need to. Because, once it exists, it stays. She let the silence hold. Long enough for everyone to understand what had just happened. Then she continued. The Hawthorne Futures Initiative was not created to provide access without belonging. She said. Clear. Nor was it created to support institutions that confuse diversity with presentation. A few people looked down. Others stayed still. But no one disagreed. Because they couldn't. She closed the file. Slowly. Then said. Effective immediately. Bellmore Academy's participation in the initiative is under formal reconsideration. There it was. Not a warning. Not a suggestion. A consequence. Final. Mercer didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The board members exchanged brief looks. Controlled. But tense. Because now, this wasn't about one student. It was about reputation. Funding. Future. The meeting ended shortly after. Not abruptly. Decisively. People stood. Chairs moved. Voices returned. But quieter. Measured. Because everyone understood. They had just witnessed something they couldn't undo. As I walked out, I didn't feel victorious. I felt certain. Because truth doesn't feel like winning. It feels like alignment. Outside, Ava was waiting. She looked at me. What happened? She asked. I paused. Then said, they heard everything. She studied my face. And? I exhaled slowly. They couldn't ignore it. Ava nodded. Not smiling. Not celebrating. Understanding. And that mattered more. As we walked to the car, I looked back once. Bellmore stood exactly the same. Beautiful. Structured. Impressive. But no longer unquestioned. Because once the right question is asked, systems don't collapse immediately. They fracture. And fractures. Spread. The decision didn't come immediately. It came the way real consequences always do. Quiet. Then final. A week after the board assembly, an email arrived. Not from Bellmore. From Hawthorne Legal. Subject. Final determination, Bellmore Academy review. I opened it slowly. Not because I was nervous. Because I already knew. We have concluded our review. Formal. Measured. Then, the line that mattered. Bellmore Academy will be suspended from participation in the Hawthorne Futures Initiative pending structural realignment. Suspended. Not warned. Not advised. Removed. I read it again. Then once more. Because words like that don't just describe change. They create it. No initiative. No future scholarship placements. No association. No quiet prestige tied to Hawthorne. And in places like Bellmore, that matters more than anything they would ever say out loud. That afternoon, the second message came. Internal. Short. Daniel Mercer was stepping down. Effective immediately. No explanation. There never is. Because when systems correct themselves, they don't confess. They replace. By the end of the week, the changes spread. Committee leadership. Restructured. Vanessa Whitmore. Removed from all school-affiliated roles. Not publicly announced. Just gone. The kind of disappearance that tells you everything, without saying a word. Parents adjusted quickly. They always do. New conversations. New alignments. New distances. Because loyalty in places like that is never personal. It's positional. At Bellmore, the tone changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Language softened. Processes clarified. And most importantly, visibility shifted. Ava's name was no longer an exception. It was normal. And that was the point. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I stood near the front of the school. Same stone entrance. Same polished steps. Same place where I had once felt like I didn't belong. A group of parents stood nearby, talking. Casual. One of them glanced at me, then smiled. Not politely, not performatively, just normally. It was a small thing. But small things are where change shows up first. Ava walked out a few minutes later, backpack over one shoulder, relaxed, not careful, not watching the room, just herself. How was your day? I asked. She smiled. Good. Simple. We started walking toward the car. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Mom. I looked at her. They don't talk about me like that anymore. I nodded. I know. A pause. Then she added, I don't feel like I have to be careful all the time. That was it. Not victory. Not revenge. Freedom. And that was worth everything. We got into the car, closed the doors, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Not tense. Not waiting. Complete. As I started the engine, I thought about everything that had happened. The whispers. The exclusions. The careful cruelty. The system. Because that's what it had always been. Not one person. Not one moment. A system. And systems don't fall apart because someone gets angry. They fall apart because someone pays attention long enough to prove how they work. Bellmore didn't lose everything. The buildings were still there. The reputation would recover. The next brochure would look perfect. But they lost something they wouldn't get back easily. Control. Control of the narrative. Control of the image. Control of who gets to belong and who only gets to appear. And once that control is broken, everything changes. As we drove away, Ava leaned back in her seat, relaxed, exactly as she should have been from the beginning. I kept my eyes on the road, but I allowed myself one thought. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. They had looked at us and decided we should feel lucky just to be there. What they didn't understand was that we were never asking for permission, only for truth. And once the truth was seen, by the right person, everything else took care of itself.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real persons or events is coincidental. This video is not news, not a documentary. It is presented for creative storytelling purpose only. AI-assisted production.